900 Years of Silence. The Secret of the Forgotten Well. Part 1. The Age of Stone and Shadow. Before the first crown was forged in fire, before the first boundary was marked with a stone wall, there was a different kind of silence in this land. It wasn't the empty silence of a desert. It was a heavy, humid silence, the kind that feels like it's holding its breath. The air back then didn't just carry the scent of rain. It carried the weight of thoughts that hadn't been spoken yet. In the center of this world, hidden in the high emerald heart of the island, sat the well. We talk about wells now as simple things, holes in the ground to fetch water for the cattle or the hearth. But this was something else entirely. This was a rift. This was a silver eye in the face of the earth that looked straight back into the void from which all life emerged. No mason had ever touched its sides. No human hand had ever cleared the moss from its rim. It was a primordial wound, pulsing with light that didn't come from the sun or the moon. Overhanging this well were 9 ancient hazel trees. These weren't the small, scrubby trees you see in the hedgerows today. These were giants. Their roots reached down so deep they drank from the memory of the world's creation. Their branches were so high they caught the dusts of passing stars. And once a year they would drop 9 crimson nuts into the water. Inside those nuts was the totality of everything. Every secret, every language, every future betrayal, and every forgotten joy. And in the depths of that well lived the great fish. He was as old as the mountains, his scales a mosaic of every sunset that had ever colored the sky. Every time a nut fell, he would eat it, and his wisdom would grow. He was the keeper of the source. But wisdom is a dangerous thing when it is hoarded. The high king of that time knew of the power of the well. He built his palace nearby, but he didn't build it to share the water. He built it to guard it. He decreed a law that was harder than the iron he would eventually discover. No woman was to look upon the well. No commoner was to breathe its vapors. Only the king and his 3 chosen cupbearers could approach the silver water. The king believed that by controlling the source, he could control time itself. He drank the water in secret, and it turned his heart into something cold and crystalline. He became a man who knew too much. He knew when the harvest would fail, but he didn't help the hungry. He knew which of his friends would turn against him, so he struck them down before they could even think of the act. He lived in a future that hadn't happened yet, leaving his people to suffer in a present that he no longer cared about. In the shadow of this cold, wise king lived the queen. She was a woman born of the southern coast, a person of the salt and the spray. She had been brought to the king's hall as a prize, a way to cement a treaty between the inland and the sea. For years, she lived as a ghost in the house of gold. She watched the king grow more distant. She saw the way his eyes turned silver and hollow from the things that he had seen in the water. She realized that the well wasn't a blessing to the kingdom. It was a parasite. It was feeding the king's ego while the rest of the land withered in ignorance. She began to feel a pull, a calling from the earth itself. The well wanted to be free. The water wanted to flow. Part 2. The 7 Days of Silence. The queen did not act on impulse. She was a woman of patience, a woman who understood that to break a law 900 years old, one must first understand the rhythm of the breaking. For 7 days, she stopped speaking. She moved through the palace like a shadow, ignoring the king's questions and the whispers of the servants. She was turning her ears to a frequency that the stone walls of the palace couldn't block. She was listening to the trees. On the first day of her silence, she sat by the western window and watched the birds. She noticed that the birds never flew over the well. They circled it, as if there was an invisible pillar of fire rising from the water that burned their wings. She realized that the well was a vacuum, pulling all the energy of the land into its dark silver eye. On the third day, she felt the vibration in her teeth. It was a low, humming note that seemed to come from the bedrock itself. It was the sound of the water wanting to move. It was the sound of a river that hadn't been born yet, trapped beneath the weight of the king's law. On the seventh day, the moon was full and heavy, hanging over the forest like a ripe fruit. The king was away, meeting with his lords in the north, trying to use his secret knowledge to gain more land. The palace was quiet. The guards were lulled into the deep, magical sleep by the scent of the hazel blossoms drifting on the wind. The queen stood up. She took off her heavy golden torque, the symbol of her status. She removed her rings and her silk robes. She dressed in a simple shift of unbleached linen. She wanted nothing between her skin and the magic she was about to face. She walked out of the palace gates. The forest didn't feel dark to her, it felt welcoming. The trees seemed to lean back to give her a path. The moss felt like velvet under her bare feet. She walked for hours, guided not by sight, but by that humming vibration in the earth. As she neared the clearing of the 9 hazel trees, the atmosphere changed. The air became thick, almost like liquid. The grey-green Atlantic mist began to swirl around her ankles, rising up to her waist. It wasn't cold, it was warm, like a breath. She saw the 9 trees. They were glowing with a faint, internal light. Their leaves were the colour of bruised silver, and the crimson nuts hung from the branches like drops of blood. In the centre was the well. She stood at the edge and looked down. The water was perfectly flat. She didn't reflect her face. Instead, it showed her the world as it truly was. She saw the atoms of the air dancing. She saw the lines of power that connected the mountains to the sea. She saw the salmon moving in the depths, its eye fixed on her. "You have been a secret too long," she whispered. Her voice was the first sound to break the silence of that clearing in 1,000 years. The salmon breached the surface. It didn't splash. It moved like a knife through silk. It looked at her, and with an intelligence that was older than the human race, it seemed to be waiting. The queen knew what she had to do. The law said that to look into the well was death. To walk around it against the sun was to undo the world. She didn't want to die, but she was no longer afraid of the end. She began her walk. The first circuit was the hardest. With every step she took, moving counterclockwise, the weight of her life began to fall away. She remembered her childhood by the sea, the taste of the salt, the sound of her mother's voice. These memories didn't fade, they intensified, becoming so vivid she could almost touch them. The second circuit brought the pain. She felt the grief of the woman who had come before her, the ones who had been told they were not worthy of the light. She felt the frustration of the land, the fields that wanted to be green but were held back by the king's cold wisdom. The ground beneath her began to crack. The roots of the hazel trees groaned like dying giants. The third circuit was a blur of light and sound. The mist turned from grey to a brilliant, blinding white. The humming in the earth rose to a deafening roar. She reached the point where she had started and stopped. She didn't just look, she touched. She reached out her hand and dipped her fingers into the silver water. The well didn't just overflow, it erupted. It was as if the very heart of the island had burst open. A pillar of silver water, miles high, shot into the night sky, tearing through the canopy of the hazel trees and scattering the crimson nuts to the four winds. The queen did not run. She stood at the center of the explosion. The water hit her with the force of a falling mountain, but it didn't crush her. It poured into her. It filled her lungs, her veins, her mind. She became the vessel for everything the well had hoarded. She was no longer a woman of flesh and bone. She was a storm of a memory and light. The water surged over the rim of the well, a massive, unstoppable wall of liquid silver. It didn't flow like a normal flood. It moved with a purpose. It carved a deep, jagged path through the earth, heading toward the east, toward the sea. As it moved, it took her with it. Part 3. The Long Flow. The first 3 centuries were a time of chaos and creation. The king's place was the first thing to go. He returned from the north to find his halls of gold and glass buried under a mile of rushing water. His wisdom hadn't saved him. He had known the flood was coming, but he hadn't understood that it wasn't a disaster, it was a birth. He spent the rest of his life wandering the banks of the new river, calling for a wife who would never answer. The queen was now the river. She flowed across the heart of Ireland, a ribbon of silver that brought life wherever it touched. She didn't have a human shape anymore, but she had a human consciousness. She felt the fish swimming through her hair. She felt the deer drinking from the banks. She felt the trees leaning down to dip their branches in her cool, wise water. During these 300 years, the land was transformed. The secrets of the well were no longer hidden. They were dissolved in the water. The farmers who drank from the river found that their crops grew taller and stronger. The poets who sat by her banks found that their words had a new haunting resonance. The world became a place of wonder again. But the river was lonely. She remembered the feel of the sun on her skin. She remembered the sound of laughter. Now her only voice was the babble of the water over the stones. Her only touch was the cold silt on her riverbed. She watched the people on the banks, but she could no longer talk to them. She was a god to them, a source of life, but she was no longer one of them. She saw the rise of the first great stone forts. She saw the people of the mist, her people, start to build monuments to the stars. They built great mounds of the earth and stone, aligning them so that on the shortest day of the year, the sun would reach into the dark and touch the heart of the mountain. The river watched these rituals with a bittersweet pride. She knew that the wisdom they were using came from her. She was the one who had given them the understanding of the heavens and the earth. But she also saw the first seeds of the same greed that destroyed the king. The leaders began to claim sections of the banks. They fought over the fishing rights. They built walls to keep others away from the water. The river felt their anger and their greed like a bittersweet taste in her mouth. She would surge and flood, washing all their walls away, trying to remind them that she belonged to everyone and to no one. She realized then that her exile was not just a physical transformation. It was a 900-year observation of the human heart. She was the witness to the cycle of greed and grace that would define the island forever. Part 4. The Age of Iron and Ice. The second 300 years brought the cold. The climate of the world shifted. The long golden summers of the mist people were replaced by harsh winters of grey, iron-coloured skies. New men arrived to the shores. They didn't come with songs or stones. They came with iron. They were a harder people. They didn't look at the river and see a goddess. They saw a highway. They saw a way to move their armies and their goods. They built boats of wood and skin and rowed across her back, their oars cutting into her surface like tiny wounds. The river felt the change in the land. The forests were being cut down, The ancient oaks that had stood since the beginning of time were being turned into charcoal to feed the iron fires. The air began to smell of smoke and salt. This was the time of the great heroes. These were men and women of immense strength and even greater pride. They fought epic battles on the banks of the river. She felt the blood of the fallen mixing with her water. She felt the weight of their iron swords as it was tossed into her depths as offerings. She tried to speak to them through the mist. On cold nights, she would rise up as a woman made of grey-green Atlantic fog, standing on the surface of the water, warning the warriors of the futility of their violence. They would see her and name her a spirit of war or a goddess of death. They didn't realize she was trying to save them from themselves. During this era, the river became a boundary. The land was carved up into provinces, and the river was the line that no one was supposed to cross. She became a place of tension, a place where treaties were signed and broken. She saw the greatest of the heroes fall. She saw the women who loved them weep by her banks. She saw the children playing in the shallows, unaware that they were growing up in a world of constant conflict. The river felt herself growing older. The raw silver power of the well was starting to settle into something more stable, more predictable. She was becoming a part of the landscape, no longer a miraculous eruption, but a permanent feature on the earth. She missed the 9 hazel trees. She missed the salmon. She felt the wisdom of the nuts she had swallowed so long ago starting to fade, becoming a part of the background noise of her existence. She began to wonder if the 900 years would ever end. She began to wonder if there would be anything left to return to when the time was up. Then she felt a new vibration. It wasn't the hum of the earth or the clatter of iron. It was a thin metallic sound, a bell. Part 5. The Arrival of the Bell. The final 300 years were the most profound. The era of the heroes was fading. The Iron Kings were being replaced by men of the book and the bell. A new magic was entering the land, one that didn't come from the earth or the well, but from across the sea. It was a faith of peace. It was also a faith that demanded the old ways be buried. The river saw the first small stone chapels being built on her banks. She saw the holy men in their brown robes, kneeling in her water to wash away the sins of the people. They didn't recognize her as the queen of the well. To them, she was just water, a symbol of purity, but a thing without a soul. She felt a strange kinship with these new men. They were seekers, just as she had been. They looked at the world and saw a deeper meaning, even if they used different words to describe it. However, she also saw the loss. The people stopped listening to the trees. They stopped leaving offerings at the ancient wells. They began to see the world as something to be mastered and managed rather than something to be feared and respected. The grey-green mist was no longer a veil between worlds, it was just weather. The river watched as the last of the people of the mist retreated into the hollow hills. She saw them pass through the hidden doors in the mounds, leaving a surface of the world to the men of the iron and the bell. She felt the silence of the other world growing deeper, further away. She was the only thing left that remembered the beginning. She saw the arrival of the Northmen in their long ships. She felt the fire of their steel as they raided the chapels on her banks. She saw the blood of the holy men mix with her water, just as the blood of the heroes had done centuries before. She saw the resilience of the people as they rebuilt time and time again. She realized that the story of the island was a story of layers. Each wave of people brought something new, but the river, the memory of the land, remained the same. She was the thread that held the 9 centuries together. As the final decades approached, the river felt the change in her current. She was flowing slower. The silver light in her depths was becoming a soft, steady glow. She knew the prophecy of the 900 years was nearing her completion. She began to look for a sign. The prophecy said that the exile would end when the world had forgotten the well, and the woman of the water heard the sound of her own name spoken by a stranger. She waited in the quiet coves, she waited beneath the bridges, she waited in the estuaries of the fresh water met the salt. One evening at the edge of the world near the western cliffs, where the Atlantic mist is thickest, she saw a man. He was an old man, a scholar of the ancient things. He was sitting on a stone by the bank, his hair as white as foam. He wasn't looking for fish, he wasn't looking for gold, he was looking at the water. He reached down and touched the surface, exactly as she had done 900 years before. The source, he whispered, the woman who became the flow, the one they called the soul of the land. He spoke her true name, the name she had forgotten herself, the name that had been scrubbed from the history books by the king and the iron men. The river stopped. For one magnificent second, the entire length of the river, from the mountains to the sea, stood perfectly still. The fish stopped swimming. The birds stopped mid flight. The very wind ceased to blow. Part 6. The breaking of the current. The transformation was not violent this time. It was a long, slow sigh. The water began to pull inward. The silver light that had been spread thin across the island began to concentrate, flowing back toward the center, back toward the western bank where the old man sat. The riverbed was exposed. For miles the earth lay bare, showing the secrets that it had hidden for 9 centuries. The iron swords, the gold torques, the bones of the fallen, they all sat in the mud, cold and silent. From the center of the current, a form began to emerge. It wasn't the girl of the southern coast anymore. The 900 years had left their mark. The figure that stepped onto the shore was a woman of immense age and even greater beauty. Her hair was a cascading waterfall of silver. Her skin was the color of the gray-green mist. Her eyes were the deep, wise silver of the well. She stood on the grass, her bare feet feeling the solid earth for the first time in near millennium. She looked at her hands, seeing the translucent parchment-like skin. She felt the weight of her own body, the gravity that she had defied for so long. The old scholars looked at her in awe. He didn't run. He didn't bow. He simply held out a hand to help her stand. "It is over," he said. "It is over," she whispered. Her voice was like the sound of 1,000 pebbles moving in a stream. The silver light that had sustained her began to fade. The magic of the well, the raw power of the 9 hazel trees, was finally returning to the earth. She felt the clock of her mortality, which had been frozen for 900 years, start to tick. She didn't have much time left. The price of the exile was the years she had missed. She looked out over the land. She saw the stone walls, the iron bridges, the distant smoke in the cities. She saw the world that was louder, harder, more crowded than it was when she was left. But she also saw the beauty. She saw the resilience. She saw that the wisdom she had set free was still there, hidden in the hearts of the people who still stopped to look in the water. "Baptize me," she said to the old man, not because she followed the new faith, but because she wanted to be a part of this world as it was now. She wanted to be a human being one last time before she became a memory. The man brought the water from the receding river. He spoke the words of the new faith, but he added the old names too. He acknowledged the woman, the queen, the river, and the soul. As the water touched her forehead, she closed her eyes. She felt the 900 years of salt, ice, and silence lift from her shoulders. She left the warmth of the sun on her face. She saw the 9 hazel trees one last time, their branches heavy with fruit, and she saw the salmon leap in the silver well. She fell back into the old man's arms. Her body dissolved, not into water this time, but into a fine silver mist that was carried away by the Atlantic wind. The river began to flow again, but it was a normal river now. The silver light was gone. The magic had settled into the silt and the stones. It was just water, precious, life-giving, but ordinary. Part 7. The Ghostly Song of the Stream. They buried her memory in the songs they sang. The well was never found again. The palace of the king was lost to the mud. The 9 hazel trees became part of the myth, a story told to children to explain why the salmon is the wisest of fish. But if you go to the river today, you can still feel it. You feel it in a way the air cools as you approach the bank. You feel it in the way the mist seems to follow the path of the water, even when there is no wind. You feel it in the sudden, inexplicable sense of peace that comes over you when you stop and watch the ripples. We are the children of iron and stone, living in a world of glass and steel. We have forgotten the names of the gods and the laws of the well. But the river remembers. The woman who was the water is still there, in a way. She is the persistence of the flow. She is the reminder that no matter how much we try to control the world, the truth will eventually find its own way out. She reminds us that wisdom isn't a trophy to be kept in a vault. It's a gift to be shared, even if sharing breaks the world. Listen to the water. It's not just noise. It's a conversation that has been going on for 900 years. It's the sound of a queen who chose to be a river so that we could be free. And on certain nights when the high moon reflects the deep pools, you might just see a flash of a silver scale. It's the old salmon, still waiting, still remembering, reminding us that the spring always comes, even if it takes 9 centuries. Even if the world changes beyond recognition, the source is still there, waiting for someone to walk around the well 3 times and touch the water. I think we like to believe that we are the masters of our own world. We build our cities of glass and we map every inch of the earth, convinced that there are no secrets left to find. But then the mist rolls in from the Atlantic. The air turns cold, and for a split second, the modern world feels thin. In those moments, I think we're hearing her. We're hearing the woman who gave up her crown and her life to become the very water that sustains us. She didn't do it so she could be worshipped. She did it so the light would belong to everyone. So the next time you find yourself standing by a quiet stream and looking into the deep, still pool, take a second. Don't just look at the reflection. Listen. Listen to the 900 years of history flowing past your feet. Because the spring always comes, but it only speaks to those who are quiet enough to hear it. If this story has moved you, leave a comment. Let me know what ancient secrets you think are still hidden in the corners of this island. And if you want to keep walking these paths with me, hit that subscribe button. We have a lot more ground to cover. But for now, until the mist rises again, stay safe in the shadows.